Hey, I'm Jess Puddister, and this is Walking the Walk, a podcast about climate action in Newfoundland and Labrador. Emma Power is a mechanical engineer from Conception Bay South. She graduated from Memorial University in 2019, and while a lot of her peers went into the oil and gas industry, she knew that she wanted to work on climate action. Emma landed a job with Fundamental Inc. and is now working with towns across the province to slash carbon emissions and build climate resilience. There are a lot of puzzle pieces that need to fit together to address the challenges of climate change, and each town's puzzle is different. But they share a lot of commonalities, and they can all take steps forward from wherever they're starting. In this episode, Emma takes us through the kinds of climate solutions she helped create to help 6 towns in Newfoundland lower their carbon emissions and protect their communities. She tells us why she believes municipal governments can move beyond talking about climate change and actually walk the walk. Hey Emma, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for coming on and having the chat with me today.
Thanks. No trouble at all.
So one of the main things you've been working a lot on over the last couple years, I guess, is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Transitions 2050 project. So this is a project that is funded federally, and Fundamental was able to successfully apply to that program to support 6 communities in developing their response to climate change. So what's all that about? And you know, what was it like to engage directly with communities here in the province?
I really had no idea what I was getting into. Just out of school, I hadn't had much, interaction with the public or municipal figures to date. So that was a new thing for me. Just jumping in kind of from nothing.
It must have been a little bit intimidating.
A little bit. I was so used, you do get sort of isolated in engineering. You just, you study and you write exams and you do labs and you're with your little group of people and that's kind of it for a long time. So it was different, but also nice to get to talk to some other people and people who are not in my field. So that was cool. Yeah, I started, this project started in 2019, I believe, in the summer.
That sounds right, yep.
So we had these 6 municipalities I had already signed on, and they were all across the province, basically.
Can you tell us the names of the communities?
Yeah, so on the Avalon we had Paradise, Balleen, and Torbay. And then on the southwest coast we had Port aux Basques. On the west coast we had Stephenville, and then sort of on the, not the north, but sort of on the north, Baie Verte. So those were the 6 towns that we've been working with. Of course, we couldn't always go see these people in person, so we did a lot of virtual stuff even before the pandemic. So we were well equipped for that when that happened. But we did have one event in the summer to kind of kick off the project where we did invite everybody to one place. So Stephenville, Baie Verte, and Port aux Basques all traveled, and we had a workshop where everyone could meet, and we got started on brainstorming why they were involved and what they wanted to get out of the project and what we could provide them with, and also what our vision was for how we could help them. So we kind of did a two-way exchange of what do we want from each other, and what is this lovely milestone program that FCM has laid out for you in terms of climate action, and how do you do a greenhouse gas inventory, and just broke down the details for them to get started. And from there, we've just been working with them individually, but also relaying common information and making connections when we can to keep them all in the loop with each other. The main outcome that we wanted from the beginning for the project was a climate action plan for each town. And that's a pretty, I guess it's sort of broad in a way, what that can mean.
So if you were in an elevator and you had to explain to someone what is a climate action plan, what would you say?
It is a strategic roadmap of how a community or organization plans to address climate change in their operations.
Cool. Why would they do that? What's the motivation for them to even bother?
there's the mitigation side and the adaptation side. Either of those sort of have a different purpose. So if a community is very concerned about potential weather events, for example, and like the state of their infrastructure and potential damage, then adaptation is probably their focus and why they would be doing this.
What does adaptation look like?
So adaptation is more so about taking the climate projections that have been done by the local specialists and trying to project what that means in terms of the capacity of the current infrastructure to handle either the weather events like rainfall events, snow events, or maybe winds like associated with storm events or storm surges on the coast, and looking at if there are preventative measures they can take to make sure that when those things happen, because they will, how can we put something in place so that the house next to the coast won't just wash away?
Think about it like this. Mitigation deals with the root cause of the climate crisis, and that's about the carbon that we're sending to the atmosphere. So achieving net zero is about limiting the carbon we're sending up there so that we can slow climate change down. That's mitigation. Adaptation is dealing with the impacts of climate change that we know are coming down the pipe. So that's flooding, that's heat waves, that's wildfires, that's storms, that's coastal impacts. We've got to be prepared to deal with those things in our communities and for our infrastructure.
Is there something we can do?
Gotcha.
Is there something we can do with our stormwater system to make the chances of the whole street flooding less likely?
Totally, yeah.
So are there things we can do to mitigate the risk?
Does it come down to dollars and cents for these towns?
A lot of the time it does. I think for adaptation, less so than mitigation. So adaptation towns might be more likely to see like, oh, if we don't do this, like people could, lose their property or could be injured or whatever. And that's more of a driver. For mitigation, which is about reducing greenhouse gases and environmental impact, that is harder to push without thinking about money, because it gets back to climate change being this like vague, phenomenon that we don't understand and seems really far away.
Right.
So to invest in fuel switching, for example, like to take your building off of furnace oil, which is a first-hand combusted fossil fuel right there, to change your building from fossil fuel to electricity, might not feel like worth doing, because what difference does it make to you if the building is heated with oil or electricity? Like the building's still warm, people are still comfortable,
right.
Don't care, So, but if you can show that there's a financial case to that, as well as the environmental impact and the reduction in emissions, then people are more likely to go for it.
Okay.
So I feel like adaptation, there is still that. Like, of course, it has to make financial sense. And in adaptation cases, the case is often avoided repair cost or avoided damages.
That's a huge one. That's when we see...
It's harder to tell like exactly, what that is going to be. You don't know what storms are going to happen. So you just take the statistical information and say, if you don't do this, it is this likely that this will happen. If you implement this adaptation measure, we reduce the risk this much. And that's as much as you can do. And you can hope that that means that your risk of having to spend money is reduced a certain amount as well.
Right.
But the financial case for action is one thing that we've been really diligent in including in our action planning, not only just to get towns on board, because of course all councils have to approve this action plan for any particular town. So it has to make sense to all the councillors. It has to make financial sense to the, town finance people, and it has to make sense to everyone. So we include it for those reasons. But we also include it because it's good to know. It's good to know for their long-term planning whether this investment will result in a lower life cycle cost than another thing. And sometimes that means that the upfront cost is more. So without exploring what the life cycle cost is, people might automatically dismiss the higher initial cost option. because it seems like
especially
more,
given like the 4-year election cycle.
Yeah, right. So we have to be clear in what we're recommending sometimes to say, we know this might be a bit more, but in the avoided damages, in the avoided operational fuel cost, in the avoided, any of those types of costs that maintenance is often lower for other for like greener technologies. So by avoiding those types of operational continuing costs, your upfront investment will pay off fairly quickly. Right. And that's often the case. So we always include that. It's a pretty key part of any decision making, of course, budgeting is. So we do include that all the time. And it does come up. Basically, the first question anyone's going to ask when you bring up a project is, well, what does it cost? Always. So you have to be prepared for that.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, like, those councillors have to be able to go back to their constituents, like the people who live in community, and be able to say, like, this decision makes sense for our community, not just because we want to be good stewards of the earth, but because, we have a limited annual operating budget and we need to make the best decisions we can with the information we have access to. Yep. So it sounds like it all really plugs in nicely together. You've been working with these 6 communities, and we've talked about the mitigation side of things and the adaptation side of things. I wonder if you could pull an example from your work in both of those realms of climate action that can really sort of demonstrate to our listeners what that means for communities in Newfoundland.
Sure. So one of the towns that we've been working with, Stephenville, they decided, so I guess I should say first that in our proposal, our Transition 2050 proposal to FCM, we included an amount of money for each town to spend on a capital project, a climate change related capital project. And each of the towns took advantage of that. So Stephenville, they decided to buy a community scale composting machine. And I like this example because first off, most people don't realize the greenhouse gas emissions associated with waste. So when we do greenhouse gas emissions inventories, which is a sort of separate topic altogether, we're calculating how many emissions are being released into the atmosphere from different activities that are happening in a town, either in the town as a whole, like the whole community, or just from municipal operations.
And I guess too on that front, like every town is paying for the amount of waste that they send to the landfill, right?
Yep.
And one of the heaviest components of our waste is organics because it's so there's so much water in organics.
Yep.
So not only does throwing organics out in the garbage result in the production of methane, like a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change, it's also costing the towns a lot of money to do that.
It is, yeah. And in Stephenville, this is especially the case because on the West Coast, and even some places in Central, maybe, the tipping fees are much higher than they are on the Avalon. And that just has to do with how many transfer stations it has to go through before it gets to the landfill. So the tipping fees so high, there is a huge financial incentive for diverting organics. So it's not just a greenhouse gas thing, although that is huge. When we did our emissions inventories, we included the solid waste emissions from the whole town. So all of the waste that's collected is weighed by the contractor who picks it up. So we had that information, and it's a huge amount of emissions. It's more than all of the town fleet fuel being burned.
Like how much? Tell us how much carbon. We went back and checked on the numbers, and for town fleet emissions, it was 324 tons of CO2 equivalent. Solid waste emissions, on the other hand, were more in the range of 3,500 tons. That's 10 times more.
Yeah, so the solid waste emissions are more than the town vehicles burning gas. They're more than the building fuel and the electricity.
That's surprising.
So it's typically the biggest chunk of the pie. The one thing to consider is the way that we've been doing our greenhouse gas inventories is including the waste of the whole community, all the residents and everyone, not just municipal operations. So anyway, it does end up being quite a big chunk of their emissions, and organic waste is a large portion of that because of how the organic material breaks down in the oxygen-starved environment of a landfill.
Totally. So you're saying Stephenville bought a community scale organics digester to address this issue?
They did. Yep. And so what's going to go along with that is a program for the community.
What does this machine look like? Like, I'm trying to picture like this big robotic thing.
It's a big cylinder, basically, on legs. And the cylinder rotates. And that's what mixes up the organics inside and keeps it aerated.
Like all by itself? Or is there got to be like someone there constantly cranking the wheel?
It's electric. Yeah, so
all right, that's good.
There's a button, and you just press the button, and it rotates around, and it kind of travels along the long tube. And when it comes to the other side of the tube, it's done. Like it's dirt.
And then what happens to what comes out?
They will collect it, and I don't know what Stephenville plans to do with it yet, to be honest. They can either just like offer it to residents for free, like come take some compost if you want it.
So it's compost. What comes out the other end is usable for agriculture or gardening or whatever anyone might want to grow.
Yes.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing to me that like everybody isn't doing this right now.
Yeah, I know. And the thing about, you don't need a fancy machine to compost. Like even on this scale, you can do it just in a big pile of organic waste that you turn every so often with, shovels or cranes or whatever. But this way is very simple and easy and clean.
That's amazing. Okay, so Stephenville is really like they're being a role model right here for other communities in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah, and Stephenville's been pretty on the ball in general. Like they've been pretty active in the climate action kind of space. They have, well, it's not just Stephenville, but Stephenville and Appleton Glenwood, and I'm probably going to forget someone, but they have the wetland wastewater treatment system.
Yes.
Which is a pretty cool engineered wetland system. So that means that they don't need a mechanical treatment plant to process their organic waste, not their organic waste like from the kitchen, but their organic waste from the bathroom. And the wetland is just plants, and the plants clean the water for them.
Imagine.
Yeah, isn't that cool? And then while they do that, the plants themselves are good because they soak up carbon, like any
put out oxygen.
Plant does. Yeah.
So really, there's a lot of built-in tech sort of solutions that exist within the ecosystem itself. Like there's not even a lot of
like if we weren't here, the ecosystem would have taken care of this problem, right? Like this problem wouldn't be here. The ecosystem knows how to filter carbon and water. We've just messed it up a lot.
What I'm hearing is that we really need to just step back and make room for the ecosystem to do its functions and create space for that to happen.
Yes. And that kind of leads in
cool.
very well. That leads in very well to the example I was going to give for adaptation.
Awesome.
Bayvert is having currently a lot of issues with their infrastructure. It's just old. And that's the case for a lot of municipalities in Newfoundland. Their operating budgets are so small that how are they supposed to replace everything they need to replace all the time? Or upgrade to a better system all at once when they're still facing the incremental repairs all the time to just keep things running day to day. So that's kind of where Bayvert is right now. And they keep seeing issues with their water and stormwater pipes breaking. When they break, they have to tear up the road to fix the pipe, and then they have to fix the road again. And it's just, they're in a cycle of constant repairs.
It sounds really inefficient.
Right? And that's basically what happens everywhere in Newfoundland.
That's got to be really stressful for town staff and councils to manage on a regular basis, especially seeing the futility in that.
Yeah. And that's happening anyway, just before climate change has really changed our precipitation patterns a lot. So it's changed a little bit. It's been changing a little bit all the time, but it's going to continue to get worse. So if we don't upsize some of these systems, like water systems, they're just going to break more often.
Right.
And the cycle will speed up if they don't just replace them now with what should be there. But also the other trick is what should be there now is not based on the climate now, because you don't just put a pipe in the ground for the next 2 years. You put the pipe in the ground for the next 20 years. So you have to think about what are the precipitation patterns going to be in 20 years, and let's put the pipe in that's big enough right now so that it's fine until then.
Right. And I would say probably like a lot of the pipes that are in the ground in Newfoundland and Labrador right now were put there in, say, 1970. So maybe like
Yes.
50 years ago. So the problem is even further exacerbated.
Yes, and the weather now is not the same as it was then.
Of course. Yeah.
So that's where they are. So what we're suggesting in terms of adaptation is to, yes, increase the size of your systems in line with the new like precipitation projections, but also, why do we constantly refer back to pipes and pavement to move water around when the land does that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like water flows across landscapes. That's what happens. All rivers go to the ocean, you know. So
Thank you, gravity.
Why do we just forget about all that and tell it where to go with our metal and concrete? So
People really seem to have this like idea that they know better than nature. It's almost like.
yeah, I guess we've kind of grown up that way. But
And I don't think that's true.
no. So one kind of, it's not a new approach to do a watershed model. That's something that is typically done.
What's a watershed model?
It's when you kind of map an area and where the water bodies are and how they're connected to each other and how the water flows across the landscape, basically.
Okay.
So it often
this is a computer model you're talking about.
Yes. I don't know how they did it before computers. It's probably a lot harder. But now they do it on computers. And it just shows you what happens. Say, if this pond fills up, does this pond also fill up? Where does the water go after that? If this is too much water in here, does it end up over here or over here? And it tries to predict what will happen in those kinds of situations. And they use those for planning these stormwater management systems. And sometimes to predict flooding. So we do flood risk maps as well that show like which particular properties might be at more of a risk to flooding than others. And that's all related. But one thing that these models sometimes don't do completely, or they do it, but like people don't really interpret it and act on it, is trying to show how our planning and our development can work with these water systems rather than us just like planning around it afterward.
Aha. Okay.
So whenever we, clear an area for development, what was, forested or what was grass, is now pavement, and the water would have been absorbed there before, but now it's running off. So that's basically always considered. There are runoff regulations in building development codes and things, but we could kind of go a step further than that, than just like trying to be the least bad. So we can try.
I feel like we could say that about a lot of things.
About a lot of things, that's true. Or in general. So you can do more advanced watershed models that show very specifically how the water is moving, and how we could direct it, or use, say, existing wetlands instead of more pipes. So like maybe we could lead the water to where it would probably want to naturally go anyway, and let the filtration of those, the vegetation, clean it up a bit before it heads to the ocean, rather than just dumping it straight in the ocean, right? So we can do those kinds of things using the landscape that you have. And then hopefully, if you're directing water in better ways, it won't do so much damage on the things that you don't want it to be damaging. So if it's less so, underneath your roads, and it's, somewhere else that's a little more accessible or that's closer to natural waterways, then you might not have to, that pipe might not break so much, and you won't have to dig up the road so much, and residents won't complain about the construction so much and all those things. There's also... And
they wouldn't necessarily have to spend as much to upgrade the system then too.
No, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. This makes a lot of sense.
There's also technologies that we don't see used very often that really can help with some of this. So right now we tend to just throw more impermeable surfaces on the ground.
So like
pavement, sidewalks, all of these things that water can't get through, because we need those things for other reasons, to drive, to bike, whatever. But that changes how the water moves across the landscape very dramatically. You can no longer diffuse through that surface at all. But there are technologies that do allow that to happen. So you can use permeable pavement instead of regular pavement. That does allow for some penetration of water through it, and then there's less water in your pipes.
That's super cool.
Because it can actually just go down into the earth the way it's supposed to and find its way into the water table.
Are people in Canada like working with permeable pavement now? Like, is there any of that stuff in Newfoundland or?
In Newfoundland, I don't think so. Most of the case studies are from Ontario, BC, and it isn't super popular, but it is happening. So there are a lot of case studies that we've been sharing with the groups that we're working with to show that these things are working, yeah. And there's other fancy drainage systems you can have under the roads that are actually soil-based.
Okay.
It's not a pipe. It's a structural soil. And there's some sort of structure in there. I'm not sure what the material it's made out of, but it's like a cage type of thing that holds soil, and then the water drains down into the soil and through the soil. The soil helps, to add filtration to the water to filter the water that's coming through. And then you can also plant trees in them. So like nice big trees come out of on the curb of the road, and you don't have to. That's not going to break. Like your soil system is not going to be like a pipe and suddenly burst, and you have to, you have this big spewing water hole on your road. That's not going to happen.
Totally. So what I'm hearing is that the adaptive measures that you're talking about with the municipal partners that we have with the T2050 program is really about bolstering like nature's natural propensity to deal with these issues.
Yeah, because composting is the same. Like that's the way organic material is supposed to break down. It's not supposed to be buried under piles of plastic and metal, and it's supposed to just be able to have the worms access it and all the other microorganisms and just return
in the
to soil. That's the way it was supposed to be, and that way is more. It's in line with the natural carbon cycle.
That's brilliant, Emma.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying not to like mess things up as much as we have been to date.
I think that's a very important goal.
Yeah. So, and with the stormwater things I was talking about, the term used for those stormwater measures is low impact development. That's what is kind of thrown around a lot these days. And it just means that, like, yes, we're still developing. Yes, we still have needs that we have to address. We have to provide services to residents and all those things. But is there a better way to do it that is less impactful to the natural environment around it? And there are ways. It's just that we often don't explore them. We often just revert back to what is the typical way to do it.
Okay, that is super cool. From what you were just describing, like, is there anything specifically that you recommended to Bayvert so far that they can do in the realm of adaptation that you've been discussing?
Well, the first thing we want them to do, because you really need all the data first before you can make decisions.
Right.
So we're telling them now that you should get this watershed model done.
Okay.
And you should do it as well as you can. Mm-hmm. So you know exactly how the water is going to flow across your municipality and how best we can manage that. Instead of just, doing the regular stuff that you do every time. Maybe there's a new way we can do it that is in line with how it wants to move already, and that could be less invasive to either the other infrastructure you already have or the surrounding ecosystems.
That's super cool. I'm really excited for that.
But we can't really say now, they're going to put this particular thing in this area, or they're going to use this technology on this strip of road. Like, we don't have that yet. It's pretty early stages for them. But it really is a process that you have to just start. Mm-hmm. You have to start it. And then not just give up on it when something feels like an easier route. So even though we might not have tested a lot of these safe stormwater techniques in Newfoundland yet, that's not a reason to not do it, because we will never do it.
No, someone's got to be the first.
Yeah, we have to try that. We know that it works in these other places, and we know that it's less damaging, and we know that it can cost you less money in the long run because you're not maintaining it as much. So why not just try that? But there has to be that selling point.
Absolutely.
You have to get the message across to the people that are making the decisions, because it's not so clear when you just see that this costs this much and this costs this much.
Right.
And that's the only thing they see on the page. You'd have to relay that life cycle cost and the associated environmental impact and try to really prove the point that maybe it's time to try something else.
That's super interesting, and I'm just so excited that there's 6 towns in Newfoundland and Labrador that have already started this journey, and that they're taking steps in this direction to be, relying more on how things naturally should be taken care of, both, in terms of the carbon cycle and also, like you're describing, in terms of watershed modeling and how water wants to move through a landscape. That's really, really exciting stuff.
Even though each of the towns did a different project, they all have received basically the same information. So even though some were more concerned about other aspects, say maybe their stormwater system isn't too bad, so it wasn't top of mind, they still were educated on all of these things. So when we did training in the workshop, all of the towns are more aware of these types of low impact development options, and that's the first step, is knowing that these types of things exist and that there are alternatives to what you've traditionally done.
That's awesome. What I've heard you say, through our chat today, is that there's a lot that people at the grassroots level, on the ground, at the municipal level, can really be doing right now that can have quite significant impact on their carbon footprint and on their resilience to the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, there's no reason not to do those things.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Emma, it's been fantastic hearing your perspective on all these things today. Thank you so much for having this chat. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Fundamental is going to get up to in the coming years, and what FCM's projects, how they'll roll out across the country, and how everything moves forward.
Yes, it was very lovely, as usual, to chat with you. And I'm excited too to see what happens.
That's our episode this week. It was produced by Luke Quinton of Electric Ocean and me, Jess Puddister. Thanks to Emma Power, our guest from Fundamental Inc., and Ashley Smith, Managing Director of Fundamental Inc. Our theme music is Visions of This Earth Before Our Time by Botany, courtesy Western Vinyl. This project was made possible through a grant from the T2050 initiative in partnership with the Newfoundland and Labrador Environmental Industries Association. Transition 2050 initiative is offered through the Municipalities for Climate Innovation program, which is delivered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and funded by the Government of Canada. This initiative contributes to the FCM ICLEI Partners for Climate Protection program to help municipalities reduce greenhouse gas emissions and take action on climate change. PCP is a partnership between FCM and ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability.